Good morning, Mr. Leon. Just no problem. No problem. Good morning. We're getting ready to get started. First of all, my name is Nate Adams. I'm the director of the MWB program for St. Louis County. I want to welcome you all to the Dbe Fraud seminar. A few housekeeping notes. The restrooms for those who are in person is out the door, straight back. You go around the hall, it's on the left. Ladies and gentlemen's restroom. All lines are to be muted. For our virtual participants, if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Use the raise your hand feature, and Simone Riney will monitor the chat and the raising of the hands. For those of us in person, you can raise your hand if you have any questions. Now that those items are covered, I'd like to introduce you to Special Agent Christina Falcom. She has been with the United States Department of Transportation, Office of Inspector General, Chicago Field Office for 8 years. She has a passion specifically for disadvantaged business enterprise fraud. She is currently a task force officer with the Chicago FBI. Prior to joining U.S. DOT OIG, she was a Chicago police officer for several years. She was an investigator for the state of Illinois, Office of Executive Inspector General, and for the City Colleges of Chicago Inspector General. Christina has a long history working for federal, state, and city inspector generals. Christina is also a veteran of the United States Air Force, and it's my pleasure to introduce you, your keynote speaker today, Special Agent Christina Falcom.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Nate. I appreciate you inviting me here today. I'm hoping that you guys can hear me. We are not going to use this microphone here. It has an echo. So if you can't hear me, just raise your hand and I'll try to be a little bit louder. But I feel like I'm kind of loud anyway, so hopefully you guys will be able to hear me. I really want to thank everybody for coming here today and those that are online. I do have a big passion for DBE. It is not what we call the sexiest type of cases, but I believe that they are important cases, and that's why I go around and I do these DBE presentations. I'm going to change, are you guys able to see that? Okay. I'm going to exit here. I'm going to put a different PowerPoint up here for you guys. So today I'm going to talk to you very specifically about DBE fraud. I'm sure many of you know what DBE stands for, but for those that may not, it's a disadvantaged business enterprise. Our office, the U.S. Department of Transportation, that's our program. Even though technically we don't run the program, we do give that to the states, the counties, the municipalities to run that program. That is our program, and we do set the rules and the guidelines for it. A brief overview of what I'm kind of going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about my office and what we do. I'm going to go over the DBE program, and I'm going to talk about some case studies that I'm sure many of you would be interested in. And then at the end, we'll have some questions. I may not be able to answer all your questions, so I apologize. However, I will take note of them and I will get back to you. I will probably go through Nate. So if you guys had any specific questions that I can't answer here today, I'll write them down. I'll get the answers for you, and then I'll give them to Nate and he can pass them on to you guys. Okay? So what does the DOT OIG do? Many people have no idea what our office is, who we are. They don't even know how to contact us. We're kind of like many OIGs that just people are just unaware. So our office, the DOT OIG, we have an investigative arm and we also have an audit arm. I work in the Office of Investigations. We are the law enforcement arm of the OIG. Okay, we conduct criminal and civil investigations relating to fraud, waste, abuse, other allegations that affect our administrations, contractors, grantees, our programs, things like that. We partner with federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies and prosecutors. Here's our regional map. You can see that the Midwestern region is really large. Our office is housed out of Chicago. We do have several small offices. We have one here in Missouri, which is in Kansas City, that has two agents. And then we also have another smaller office in Columbus, Ohio. And we are about to open up another office in Minnesota. But typically, you would probably see an agent coming out of Chicago. But now that we do have two agents here in Missouri, they've been kind of tackling cases that have been happening here in Missouri. And they've only been, I think, maybe about a year we've been open down here. So if you guys have had contact with us, it was probably from an agent out of our Chicago office. So what do we investigate? Like, if you guys want to come to us, what are we looking at? So we're looking mainly at transportation safety. Those things that are really important. DOT, we cover almost every aspect of transportation. So to give you an example, we cover trains, planes, automobiles, trucks, pipelines, anything that does any type of transporting. Safety is probably one of the things that is highest on our list. The next thing is going to be contract and grant fraud. We give away a lot of money, billions of dollars in grant funding to states, those mostly to cover all the roads and things that majority of us are traveling on. So that's really also high on our list. It's one of those things that are like, well, when you're giving away $1 billion for a contract, you can almost guarantee that there's going to be some type of fraud. So we look into that. Under that, Dbe fraud falls under that contract and grant fraud. We also look at consumer fraud, workforce fraud, employee integrity within the DOT. And then there are some like very small other investigative areas of transportation that aren't necessarily covered. They're smaller. We don't have these big buckets to put them in, so they kind of fall into this other area. Common fraud schemes. When we look at common fraud schemes, we look at product substitution, false claims, DBE fraud. We look at bribery and kickbacks with individuals who have the authority to grant contracts, racketeering, embezzlement, theft, bid rigging, prevailing wage. We haven't necessarily done a lot of prevailing wage as of recently. We used to do a lot of prevailing wage with the Department of Labor, and that kind of died down a little bit. If you guys are familiar with like Davis-Bacon laws and things like that, but we're starting to kind of get that back up. You'll see typically within the federal government, we'll have waves when there's really big programs going on. We'll see a lot of cases going kind of to those programs, and things that we've worked on in the past kind of get pushed a little bit to the wayside. And then a couple of years come back and then they're like, oh, we need to start looking at these things again. It's kind of the way it works, ebbs and flows. What is fraud? So this is literally textbook definition of fraud. You know, a crime of using dishonest methods to take something of value from another person, a person who pretends to be what he or she is not, you know, a copy of something that's meant to look like a real thing in order to trick people. That's just textbook definition fraud. Well, what does that mean? Like, what are we doing with that? There are certain things when we look at something that's considered fraud for us to actually have a criminal case, we have to make sure that it fits into these 4 categories. Okay, there has to be a false misrepresentation, information, things like that. The second thing, which is most important, it has to be a material fact. Sometimes, like you'll see forms, right, that you sign, especially government forms, and they'll say, if you lie on this form, it's a 1001, you know, and you could be, you know, convicted up to 1 year and things like that. Yes, that is true. But if you put on there a wrong telephone number, is that considered material? So they would probably say, no, it's not material. So yes, did you lie? Of course you lied, but it's not something we're going to come out and say, well, you lied here, we're charging you with a 1001. So the fact has to be material. You also have to have the intent to deceive, okay? So you have to have a motive to go out there and do something, to obtain something of value. We will see individuals, and value doesn't always have to be money, okay? Value could be a position of power. We've seen people get tickets to baseball or football games and things like that. So it has to be something of value technically to you. So don't always think of something that's of value as of a money thing. It could be a place in a very prominent school that maybe your child wasn't able to get into prior to this, fraud scheme. So our program, so these numbers that I have up here that you guys will see, these are a little bit older, from 2018. Because of COVID, we don't necessarily have updated numbers, but these numbers are still in the same realm. However, we do have a new CARES Act that gave a lot more funding. This is typically, when we look at these numbers, these are usually what DOT gives out annually per year for construction projects and different other grant fundings. There may be other programs, like I talked about the CARES Act, that is in addition to this. So that those types of fundings are not calculated into this. You guys may remember Tiger funds or things like that from a long time ago. So this would just be legitimately what DOT gives out annually. So we're looking at like $53 billion in construction contracts, and about 11% of that goes to DBE. Federal highways, FTA, and the FAA, those are the only three administrations that we have that administer the DBE program. What that means is that almost all of their contracts are going to have an element of DBE. Right now, there's about, we'll say like 40,000 certified DBEs across the country. We'll see some DBEs like in Illinois, especially in Chicago, more metropolitan areas, we'll see large numbers of DBEs. I went to South Dakota and I asked for a list of their certified DBEs, and they literally gave me 14. And I said, oh, is that for one contract? We see contracts that have like several DBEs, and they're like, no, that's the state. So that, some things we have to look at where we're looking at. So sometimes when we're looking at an area like South Dakota, if they have made like a good faith effort to get a DBE, but just DBEs don't exist in that area, then they could continue on with their projects without having a DBE on their contract. So most of the country, I would say, has bigger metropolitan areas. That's where they get the most money. So we will see DBEs mandated on the projects, but in some smaller areas, like I said, like South Dakota, North Dakota, we'll see this type of very small numbers of DBEs. So, we have these DBE regulations. Many people will say, oh, there's all these things we have to go through, there's all these hoops, but there's a purpose for the DBE regulations, right? This is to have a level playing field. When you look at the disadvantaged group of individuals who historically have not been able to get contracts because of the color of their skin, because of their gender, these programs are there to make it a level playing field. We have to make sure that all of those small businesses that are run by those disadvantaged individuals have that opportunity, that they're able to come in and work these federal contracts. It's kind of like the Holy Grail, right? Whenever you see a small business, that is their goal. They want to get a federal contract. They want to make more money. They want to build their company. And that's the goal of the program. The goal of the program is to help build a company to be larger, to be able to move on and hopefully graduate from the program. Our program, our DBE program, does not necessarily have a time limit, but the goal still is to help these companies become larger so that they can graduate from the program and move on. And then maybe they could become prime contractors and things like that instead of just doing like subcontracting work. We have to make sure that the firms meet all parts of the eligibility standards, that the majority owner must be socially and economically disadvantaged, and that the applicant firm fully cooperates with the certification process and that they're giving true and accurate information. Okay, so now I'm sure you guys are aware that many of the states have given different agencies and entities the authority to certify DBE. So you'll see that maybe if they said, St. Louis County, maybe they certify DBE. In Illinois, we see like the Chicago Transit Authority has certification abilities. So if somebody is certified by one of these entities, that is good for the whole state. Okay. So if I get certified by the Chicago Transit Authority and I want to come down to St. Louis, no, that's not going to work. So I would have to come to Missouri and get certified by an entity here in Missouri. Okay. And what that means is not only would I have to be certified in Missouri, but I have to also keep my certification in my home state. Okay. But if you're going somewhere within your state, you are able to use your certification throughout the whole state. So here are the DBE criteria, right? You have ownership, okay, has to be 51%, okay? The disadvantaged individual, so we're looking at those individuals that would be considered disadvantaged, minorities, people of color, we're looking at women-owned businesses. The business size determination, that is an SBA set standard. So one of the things is that the DBE has to be a small business, and we look to the Small Business Administration to set that standard. So DOT does not set that standard. We follow those guidelines for SBA. And sometimes those standards change a little bit as, we see inflation goes up and things. So the standards may get raised. So every couple of years, we just, obviously, our program will double check and make sure that we're in sync with the same business standards as SBA. Personal net worth. This is an important one. We see a lot of times that, which sometimes I think could make people a little bit upset. We are looking at individuals' personal net worth, and that's all of their assets except for their personal residence, okay? So if you see an individual who has a small business, but they live like in a $2 million home, and that's their personal residence, it cannot be included. Okay, so, but all of their other assets, 401ks, interest in other businesses, even if they have assets that are considered like they have some very famous artwork, things that have a lot of monetary value would be considered in their personal net worth. They have to be independent. This is probably one of the more important ones when we look at Dbe fraud, okay? They cannot rely on another company for support. So we see this sometimes, not only monetary support, but sometimes backing. So if you guys are familiar with contracting for construction projects, there's bonding requirements. So sometimes these companies are really small and they're unable to get the bonding for the contract. So you'll see like these large companies kind of step in and get the bonding for them. That's not allowed, okay? If the company is not able to get the bonding, they are not able to work on the contract, okay? Control. So what we see sometimes is we'll see 51% owned by the minority individual, and then we'll see 49% owned by a non-minority individual. And all of a sudden, the minorities kind of nowhere to be found except for on paper. And the non-minority individuals running day-to-day business, they are, signing contracts, they're hiring, firing, doing everything. That is not allowed. The minority individual needs to be the one that is running the day-to-day business. They actually need to be the highest paid individual. We look at all of these things. We see who's signing the contracts. We see who's sending out the requests for supply information and things like that. We go out and we talk to employees like, do you see this minority individual here every day that is the owner? How often do you have access to them? If they say, oh no, we only talk to the other guy, he's the only person we ever see, that's a huge red flag for us. Okay, the burden of proof allocation. So when somebody who is a disadvantaged business wants to apply for DBE status, they submit a lot of documents to whatever entity is going to certify them, okay? It is not on that agency to go hunting and looking around to see if they have you need to make sure as a disadvantaged business that you are supplying that agency with everything that they need to certify you. Because what you supply them, they're going to take as true and accurate information, and they're going to certify you based on that information. So sometimes we see people say, oh, I'm a DBE, or I should be DBE, but I wasn't certified. They didn't give me. because they didn't supply what was needed to be supplied to that entity that is certifying them. It is not that entity's responsibility. So a lot of DBEs will not get certified because of that. However, sometimes we have really good people who work in the program who really love the program. Like, I love the program. And sometimes they help those individuals along who maybe don't have all the documents. They may not just say, you're denied. They may say, I can't certify you now, but you need to come back with XYZ, okay? And it is on that DBE, if they want to get that certification, that they need to come back with all those documents. So when we look at the personal net worth, it cannot exceed $1.32 million. It seems like a lot of money, right? So we're all like, well, I don't got $1 million. But sometimes we don't realize what $1 million really is. But if you have 401ks, if you have IRAs, things like that, where you actually may not have that money in your bank account, you're not using it every day, but technically you can have access to that money, it's considered part of your net worth. So while you may not have all that money in front of you, if you have it in these type of fundings, then if you exceed that, then you would be ineligible for the program. The same goes, we have seen individuals, when we look at these assets, they have really big, like cars and car shows and things like that, that are kind of like their pet projects, and we see them going around. And those assets, if it's not your like daily driving car and you have like all these extra things, those things are going to be included. Okay. Your company, so the DBE company, their annual gross income cannot exceed $23.98 million, and that's over 3 years. So the entity that is certifying you is going to take 3 years of all your gross receipts, and they're going to average them out. And as long as it's below the 23.98, then you would be able to be in the program. We talked about already the 51% owned by a minority or disadvantaged individual, and the company must be independent. This is a big one here. The company must perform what is considered a commercially useful function, okay, which we call a CUF. We'll see sometimes disadvantaged businesses on a contract, right? They're on this contract, but they're not really doing anything, okay? You show up to the site and these guys are kind of sitting around, and then you see this prime contractor, not to mention any names, maybe Walsh or something like that, and they're maybe doing this work, that the individuals who have been hired to do the work, right? So we look at that. That is really, really important, okay? They have to perform a function. It cannot just be on paper. They have to perform, a commercially useful function. So what is a Dbe investigation? We put our DBE investigations in 3 different buckets, okay? We have a front company. This legitimately is a company that only exists on paper. They don't have any employees. They don't do anything, okay? This is just for the prime contractor to get their credit, right? And then the DBEs paid some kind of fee in the background, like, hey, just fill out this paperwork, blah, blah, blah. And usually when we see this happening, we'll see a prime contractor, they'll take one of their minority employees and say, open up this company under your name. It's not going to be a real company. We just need it. And then the employee gets paid, something, they go and do it. And then they're still working for the prime contractor, right? But then they have this kind of front company. The next we see is a pass-through. So this is a legitimate company. It's a certified DBE company. It does work at many different contracts. However, some big companies, they believe that the work that they do is superior to these DBEs. However, they need them on these contracts. So they get these companies to sign all the documents, get on the contract, but then they tell the company, we actually don't want you to do the work. We're just going to pay you a fee. We have our guys. They know what they're doing. They're going to do it. And that's what's considered as a pass-through. So a legitimate company has done work, but they've been, in the past have allowed this to happen. So false eligibility. This is probably one of the hardest DBE cases to prove. I actually have an active one like this right now going on. So we have individuals who are not part of this disadvantaged group. However, they claim to be part of this disadvantaged group. We have seen individuals who put on their applications that they are African American and they have blonde hair and blue eyes. And it is very difficult. And then they come in with documents from the 1800s that says that their great uncle was mulatto. That's what it says on the document. And they want to claim that they are now disadvantaged. Our stance on that is the disadvantages of your ancestors are not your disadvantages. So what that means is that if you've lived your whole life as a white man and you find out at some point you have other ethnicities, and I believe we all have, if anybody's taken a 23andMe and all of that, right? So I'm Latina and I took 23andMe and mine literally says I'm 11% African. But I have never said I'm African American. But that's what the DNA says, right? And I know that because I'm from Puerto Rico and that's just kind of the way that it went. So I've never lived my life that way. I've always lived my life, as I'm Puerto Rican. So that's what I associate with. So we take the stance that just because you have something in your background doesn't mean that that's your disadvantage. And we have people that have literally said, well, I go to soul food restaurants. I mean, it sounds crazy. It sounds crazy, some of the things that we've seen and some of the things that we heard, and I should, this is kind of what I do, but that's not what the program is for. So that's a stance that we take, is that the disadvantages of your ancestors are not your disadvantages, okay? And then, another thing we see is the false information concerning their size or their financial status. We see them hiding money within other businesses, or we'll see the money go to their children and things like that. So we have to look, it's the hardest, like I said, the false eligibility is the hardest for us to prove. We definitely have an uphill battle when we're going that route. But that doesn't mean that we shy away from those cases, because I'm working a case right now with that. So we definitely go forward with them. Where they end up is all at the U.S. Attorney's Office, but we definitely push for this because it's not right and we're not okay with it. And it's not something that our office would want to condone in any way. Now I'm going to get into some case studies and we're going to go over a couple. This case study that I'm going to go over is Sonet Company. The owner is Brian Gainos. And this is a case that I worked personally for several years out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I've had several cases out of Milwaukee. I've had a lot of success in Milwaukee. Like I showed you that map, we have a big region. Some parts of our region, notably the Northern District of Illinois in Chicago, it is very difficult to work a DBE fraud case there. Not because they don't like it or anything like that. It's because we have so much other crime going on that they just don't have the capabilities to allow them to work some white collar fraud. And this is kind of one of the ones that gets a little bit pushed to the wayside. So I do like to work these cases in areas that I know that they have the capabilities, they have the manpower, and they don't have as much other crime that's going on as Illinois does. It's terrible. So I have had a lot of success in Milwaukee. This case was actually tried by the actual U.S. attorney out of the Eastern District of Wisconsin. He was passionate about the case. He was behind all of the agents in the case, and we appreciate that support. We don't always get it, so that was good. So several law enforcement agencies were involved in the prosecution of this case. This is a lot of alphabet soup. I get that. So I'm going to kind of go over them so you kind of guys know what these agencies are. And if you ever need to reach out to them, you can. So obviously at the top, we have DOT, Office of Inspector General. That's our office. That's me. I'm here talking to you guys today. The General Services Administration, that's GSA, OIG. The General Services, they do exactly what their name says, General Services. They do a lot of renting and things for the federal government. You look at the fleets program with the vehicles. They do a lot of administrative things, I would say, for almost all the federal government. You have the VA, which is a Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General. You have the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, DCIS, which is Defense Criminal Investigative Services. That's the military side. You have the Army Criminal Investigation Division. And then you have SBA OIG, that's a Small Business Administration OIG. So what I will tell you is that I would say 80% of the time, if you see DBE fraud going on, they are most likely committing fraud in other areas, okay? Because DBE relies very heavily on the SBA standards, if they are defrauding our program in any way related to the SBA standards, then by default, they're defrauding any SBA program that they are in. The SBA has a program that's called the 8-8 program, okay, which is very similar to the DBE program, and the amount of money and the size standards are very similar, if not exactly the same. However, they do have a cap. It's 9 years, and you're mandatory to graduate out of that program. So a lot of times we will see with the SBA, once one company graduates out of that program, we see another company kind of pop up and start to go into that program, owned by the same people or relationship to that other company. So most of the time, what we will see is fraud in all these other areas. SBA also has another program called the Hubzone Program, which if any of you guys are familiar with, that allows the company to get certain contracts in disadvantaged areas. However, the company and part of its workers have to also live in disadvantaged areas. The VA has a program for service-disabled veterans, and that allows service-disabled veterans, if they have small businesses, that they get preference on contracts. These are a lot of the programs that we will see that are defrauded along with DBE. And we're going to learn all about this in our Gainos case right now that we're talking about. This is Brian Gainos. He is not a lovely man, I will say that. And if you look at his last name Gainos, if you flip it around, it is Sonac, and that is the name of his company. So Sonac Company was owned by Brian Gainos, and this, like I said, this is out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Gainos is a Mexican-American man who was eligible for the DBE program, and he was also eligible for the SBA 8A program. And he originally, I would say that he had a stand-up business that was legitimate as it starts off. But remember, I said that when they start to graduate out of one program, they kind of need to get back in that program. These, what we call set-aside contracts. So set-aside contracts are for, in essence, these programs that are for all of the federal government. So like I said, we have the DBE program, SBA has 8A, the VA has their service-disabled veterans, SBA also has Hubzone. So when I say set-aside contracts, I'm talking about all of those kind of put together, okay? This is Jorge Lopez. He's also a player in the scheme. We're going to learn a little bit about Jorge. Jorge owned a company called Nuevo Construction. He was also Mexican American. He was a former SONAG employee, which we talked about that. Usually that's kind of how this scheme will go. We will see former employees kind of come up all of a sudden as business owners, right? So Jorge Lopez was able to get his program or his company certified as a SBA 8A, also a Hubzone, and then also USDOT DBE. Now we're going to talk about Nicholas Rebecca Sr. I wish we had a picture of him, but we don't. He's an older gentleman that doesn't have any type of social media and things like that. But this is the company SONAG Ready Mix that we're going to learn about. So I talked to you a little bit. Brian Gainos owned SONAG Company. They came up with SONAG Ready Mix. SONAG Ready Mix was based out of Milwaukee, 51% owned by Gainos, 49% owned by Nicholas Rebecca. However, that was not necessarily true because even though that's what they submitted to Milwaukee County for their DBE certification, they had a separate document that said this is 50-50. You don't own more than me and I don't own more than you. And the documents that they submitted to Milwaukee County were not true or accurate in any way, shape, or form. Then we see our friend here, telemachos, agoremos. That is a mouthful. And I will tell you that it took us a long time to learn how to say his last name correctly. This is you see he has a little NASA logo there. He is a service disabled veteran, okay? Telemachos opened up a business called C3T. C3T was owned by Telemachos and it was certified as an SDVOB, a service disabled veteran owned business, and it's also a small business. This program is run by the VA. Don't have a picture of Jim Hubbell, but Jim Hubbell is a longtime friend of Gainos. He was an employee of all the companies, SONAG, Nuvo, C3T. He would present himself as the owner of C3T at times, and he helped to run like all these straw companies. He definitely was Gainos's like right-hand man, we'll call him. So Lori Michaud, she is key to our investigation, 100% key. She was the in-house, kind of like catch-all. She handled administrative tasks. She handled the bookkeeping. She knew all the skeletons in the closet, in essence. She was a SONAG employee and did accounting for almost all of these straw companies except for SONAG Ready Mix. Nicholas Rebecca had somebody else doing that function, but she did almost everything for all of the companies. She later opened up her own company called LJM, which is her initials, Lori J. Michaud Accounting, and she became an independent contractor. The reason why she did that was because it became a red flag. Why does this one employee have paychecks from all these different companies? So then she becomes independent contractor and she just says, well, I'm an independent contractor, so these guys just all hire me because they know what kind of work I do. But that was the whole reason of her doing that. And you guys will see that, not you guys, but we see that when individuals are starting, there's a lot of snooping around. If you see the entity that is certifying you, if they're kind of asking you a lot of questions about sharing of employees, you'll start to see this independent contractor, that person all of a sudden becomes like a 1099 employee. So the next person, which is very strange, this is not something that's done a lot with DBE fraud cases. There was a certified public accountant out of Milwaukee named Mark Spindler. Mark Spindler was the CPA for all of the companies. If you guys are familiar, when you submit documents to the entities that are certifying you, you have to submit documents from a CPA that shows your financials, okay? So what we saw was Mark Spindler had one set of financials that he would provide to the entities that are certifying all of these companies, and then he had another set of financials that were the real financials. We usually don't get this far, and we usually don't see the CPA involved the way that we did with this case, which was the reason why this person was actually charged. It was something that was unusual because he did not really receive anything other than his standard fee. So we saw he was doing all this stuff, but he was charging, Gainos and company the same that he was charging other individuals. And what we came to realize was that in Milwaukee, Gainos had this reputation, and he was considered, I don't even know if, he had this reputation almost like you think of people that are in the mafia. People would come up to him, they're like, oh, it's Brian Gainos, oh, it's Brian Gainos. So when Mark Spindler was around him, Mark Spindler was a very quiet, kind of nerdy guy. All of a sudden, he's hanging out with this guy that has this big reputation. So we realized that he was doing it more for his reputation too. So it was kind of funny. So we were like, wow, so he got nothing out of this, but he was charged in this case. And you guys will see what happens. So sometimes, like I talked to you about value, what is the value, right? So it's not always monetary. So this was the case that almost wasn't. In 2011, there was a complaint made to the VA, okay, regarding C3T. That's who we talked about, Mr. Telemachos Aguademos. He's a certified disabled veteran. It came through that he was a pass-through. And they went, the VA agents, the VA has agents just like we do, and they went out and they interviewed several people. And everybody lied. Everybody told a whole bunch of lies to agents. And because they didn't have a lot to go off of, they just had this original complaint. All the statements from everybody that they interviewed were completely wrong, according to the agents at the time, to what the complaint was. So they kind of had no other choice but to close a complaint based off of all of these lies that they got from all these individuals. So then 2 years later, an employee finds a business card that was left by one of the VA agents back in 2011. So it's always important, you guys, carry your business cards. That's what they tell us now. And called that agent and reiterated that same complaint. Like, look, this was happening back in 2011 and it's still happening today. However, the agent had a little bit of more fire this time because now they're like, there has to be something to this. So they opened up a whole new case in 2013. In 2016, after 3 years of working this case, there was a lot of interviews. There was a lot of subpoenas. We had, I can't even begin to tell you the amount of boxes of documents that they had. There were several search warrants that were executed, right? And they not only were executed at the businesses, but they happened to be executed at the homes of some of the employees, okay? And one of those employees was Lori Mashad. We talked a little bit earlier how she kind of held all the, skeletons in everybody's closet. She was a key player to this investigation. So when the agents talked to her, she finally admitted everything. And she said, hold on one second. She said that the reason why now she wants to admit everything is because now this is brought to her front door. Now you're at the home of her family, her children, her husband. this was very different than earlier back in 2011 when she was kind of not telling the truth because it kind of was not a big deal to her. Well, now it's a big deal. You have federal agents at your home, executing a search warrant. And she basically told us everything. She laid it all out there. Without her, there would have been a lot of holes in our case. I'm not saying we wouldn't have gotten there, but she definitely helped us put all of those pieces of the puzzle together. So around that time, the U.S. Department of Transportation actually was not involved in the case in 2016. And they believed that they had enough to charge the case, all these things. However, they all of a sudden started to look at this money that was coming in from WisDOT. A lot of the other agencies, so DOT is different than other agencies, okay? Almost all the other agencies, they contract directly with people and they see their money coming directly from the federal agency. DOT doesn't do that. We give our money to the states and the states will divvy out that money for projects. So they saw this WisDOT money, but they didn't realize that it was actually federal dollars. They thought it was state dollars because they didn't understand how our funding worked. So once that happened, they said, oh, wow, we have all this other fraud. Then there was all this Dbe fraud and all this other fraud coming in. So then they brought me in. When I tell you, they said, we're ready to charge. So you need to get your case up to speed. Meaning I had to go and find all these Dbe documents, all these Dbe records, and these people have been certified from the 80s. I was just like, whoa, late 80s, early 90s. And I had to rummage, I had to go to archived files. And it took me, I think every single day I drove to Milwaukee from Chicago for 3 months. It was crazy, but we were able to do it. And we were able to get this case up to speed on all the programs that were being defrauded. Let's talk about these contracts, right? It's all, that's what this all boils down to, right? Contracts, contracts, contracts. Sonac Company, Nouveau Construction, Sonac Ready Mix, C3T. They received over $260 million in federally funded contracts based off of their status, their disadvantaged status. They had other contracts, but that was not based off of their disadvantaged status. So you can see DBEs, they can have contracts that they get they're not necessarily a DBE, they're just a contractor or subcontractor again on different contracts. But this is over 20 years, they got $260 million. And they got it from WisDOT, Milwaukee County, City of Milwaukee, the DOD, the Army, the VA, GSA. So now the scheme to defraud, let's talk about this. Let's talk about how Sonac Company started off as a legitimate business. This was a man who came in, like I said, he was a Mexican-American man who had a business and he built it well known in the area. He would walk around like the Godfather. Everybody was like, oh, there's Brian Gainos. It was so respected in the Milwaukee area. If you were in the construction industry, you knew who Brian Gainos was. He told lies to many different government entities. In particular, for the DBE program, we worked very closely with Milwaukee County and WisDOT. I have a very fond appreciation for those organizations because they provided me with so much information. They did kind of like their own little mini investigation. They tried several times to get these individuals kicked out of the program. And they had to have administrative hearings and things like that. So I appreciate all the work that those entities did, because when they handed that over to me and they said, please help us, there was a lot of legwork that I didn't have to do because they had already done it and they didn't have to. It's just that they had a passion for it. And that's just kind of the way that it went. And the woman that did it, her name is Ruby Dent. She has since retired, but she was actually a very key witness in our trial. So Lori Mashad, she agreed to cooperate with the government. We had, like I said, this is over 20 years. We had so many records of accounting and how the money, we couldn't even understand how they were getting this money between companies. So we're looking at these documents and it had a lot of job numbers and a lot of contract numbers, and we can't make heads or tails. So when she came in, she told us a little secret. She said, you need to look for job 200. Job 200 was their code for laundering money. And that's how they passed all the money through. And all their accounting books had this job 200 on there. We never, without that little bit of information, we never would have known, because we're talking thousands of contracts over 20 years. It would have been very difficult for us to even know where that job 200 even came from. So that was key, because at the end of the day, when you're charging a fraud case, you need to know how much money of fraud you have. So in order for us to start adding up some dollars, we needed to show this job 200 that showed where the money was going and coming out of. Very, very key to our case. So you guys familiar, many of you guys have seen this, it's called a no change affidavit. So just to give you guys a little bit, and I'm sure many of you know, so this could just be me just kind of talking and you guys like, I already know that. So I apologize. But once an entity is certified, right, every year they will fill out a no change affidavit that will just say, you certified me, nothing really has changed, okay? And then they will continue, if you can see here, they'll list their gross receipts for the last 3 years, and then they sign it. That's very, very, very important, because every time they submit these no change affidavits, that's a charge for us, okay? So if you go over several years, and this is a continuing scheme, we'll have these charges because you're signing a document that you're saying is true and accurate. Remember, we talked about material information. This has to be true and accurate. And you're saying that there's been no change, meaning I'm still the majority owner. I'm still every day handling all the business. I'm still, you know, I still don't have in excess of $1.3 million net worth, all of those things. So if you sign these documents and we find out something has changed and you're hiding that, these are all charges. So these no change affidavits are really, really important. So what is the price for fraud, right? Like, what's happening here? This is Sonat Company. We call this the Florist Avenue location. This location is like the hub, okay? This is where every company, whether it was Nuvo, Sonat Ready Mix, at some point had this address on a document that went to some entity of the federal government, okay? We did see at times they had to open up shops elsewhere just because the government's sniffing around, right? And it's a red flag if we all have the same address. So, but this was a Florist Avenue location. We executed a search warrant here. And this location eventually went up on the chopping block, and we seized it, and it was sold at an auction. So let's talk about our key players. Brian Gainos, he pled guilty, okay? And he got 6.5 years in prison. And he was debarred from federal contracts for 5 years. Also, a little side note, this is why I say he is a very bad man. I do not like this man. During our search warrants, we confiscated some computers that the FBI found child pornography on, that he was charged with later on, completely separate. He is not a good man. I do not like that man. Next is Nicholas Rebecca. Like I said, we don't have a picture of him. He's an older guy. He did plead guilty. He got 36 months probation and 1,200 hours of community service. And the community service had to be served in disadvantaged areas. It was a requirement. The judge said that that he would have to go and serve those hours in those areas. And then he also was debarred for 5 years. Jorge Lopez, a little tidbit about Jorge, which I should have mentioned earlier. So when he was the owner of Nouveau Construction, and I put that in big quotes, he actually left the state. He moved to Minnesota with his family, but was still listed as the day-to-day owner of Nouveau Construction in Milwaukee. The judge did not like that. I think that typically what we see that the judge, when you have the DBEs, the judge usually is a little bit easier on the DBEs because they feel like they're being taken advantage of by these big companies and corporations, but that's not always the case. But we did see that. So he only got 24 months probation, 24 months probation. And he was debarred for 5 years. So Telemachos Agodemos, he pled guilty. He had a very good attorney, I will say, that really championed for him. Because what he got was 29 months of a supervised release. And what that meant was kind of like odd. But what that meant was from the day he was arrested until the day he was convicted, technically, when he pled guilty, there was 29 months between that time. So the judge called it time served, okay? So his attorney really rallied for him, and I think she was a little bit more stern than the other attorneys and pushed back a lot. So I feel like he kind of got the best deal, but he also was in a very different position than the other ones. Like I said, he's a service-disabled veteran, and he was like a single father and all these things. So I think the judge took a little bit of pity on him. The next guy, Jim Hubbell, which I told you guys earlier, this was Gainos' right-hand man, right? Nothing was going to happen without Jim being involved in all of those companies. He also pled guilty. He got 2 months incarceration. However, this is the oddest thing. It was not 2 straight months. The judge ordered him 2 weekends in prison. So he would show up for prison on Friday and get released on Monday morning, work his job for the week, and then go back to prison. And that, I think it came out to like, whatever 2 months is total. I can't even remember now. But we thought it was ridiculous. Like, we're sitting in the courtroom like, what, weekend jail? But okay. And then he got 36 months probation, and also he was debarred for 5 years. The only person that went to trial on this case was a CPA. And if you remember, we talked a little bit earlier where I said this was highly unusual for us to charge a CPA. One of the things with the CPA is, you're certified by the state when you become a CPA. So if you have a felony charge, you will lose your certification. So we kind of knew from the beginning he wasn't going to plea out, because if he plead out, he would automatically lose his career. So we knew we had a little bit of uphill battle with him. But he went through, and in January of 2020, he went to trial in Milwaukee. And he was found guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud. He was sentenced to 3 months in prison. And that was not weekend prison, that was straight prison. And 36 months supervised release and 100 hours of community service. On the civil side, so what we see is a lot of times when we're doing any type of white collar fraud, we will see what we call parallel investigations. We'll see a criminal side that's moving forward, and then we see a civil side that's moving forward. The civil side is to collect any type of funds that were garnered through fraud, and they can do what's called treble damages, which is 3 times the amount of money that you technically have taken from the government. It's not often that they do that. I would say it's more often that they do double or just to get the exact amount. For the DBE portion, we were able to secure back $629,000. There was a lot of other money that was seized. I think we seized like over $2 million. We seized a condo in Colorado. He had some antique vehicles that he actually took on the road, and you would see them at like shows, like antique car shows. We seized those. We seized a building, like I said, on Florist Avenue. Equipment we seized. And all of those things were sold off in auction. I would literally say for a fraction of what they're probably worth. And the other branches were able to get their money back. What USDOT got back was $629,000. And that was specifically from Sonag Ready Mix. They had the majority of the DBE contracts that were in question. A lot of times when you have a fraud scheme that's going on for so many years, we'll see like ebbs and flows. We'll see some companies really hot and heavy, like in Hubzone contracts or 8A contracts or DBE, but we can only reach back so far when we're looking at the criminal side. Even the civil side too, I think it's like 7 years. Oh, so what triggered it? The VA received a complaint, and then they went and they did some interviews, and everybody lied. So then that investigation was shut down. Yeah, and then the business card, if you guys remember, the guy found the business card and called up and kind of said the exact same thing that was happening. So this right here is Riv Crete. I'm not too happy about Riv Crete. So what Riv Crete is Nicholas Rebecca's sons. Okay, so if we remember, Nicholas Rebecca owned Sonag Ready Mix 50%, and Brian Gainos owned it 50%. He gave his son almost the whole Sonag Ready Mix legitimately. And his sons had previously worked at Sonag Ready Mix. I would 100% have considered them part of the fraud scheme. We just didn't have enough on them, which is difficult as an investigator, right? You know, stuff is happening, you know, lots of smoke, but you know, just can't find that fire. So they were able to kind of take over Sonag Ready Mix. And now it's called Riv Crete. They have several locations. I think they're very lucrative. From what I have seen, I don't believe that they have any type of disadvantaged status or anything like that. So they may have, you know, went on the up and up, but it was kind of a tough pill to swallow that we weren't able to kind of get these guys on anything. Their dad really shielded them. I think he took the brunt. He laid on the sword for them, and they were able to continue with their business, which, like I said, it's very lucrative. You can see if you ever drive to Milwaukee, you will see you could see their businesses off the interstate, several of them. They're very large. So now we're going to talk a little bit about a case that maybe some of you may know. This is it's called McHugh. So McHugh, I wish the agent that had worked this case was here. He unfortunately passed away. He had a heart attack on duty, actually, but he worked really, really hard on this case. And I don't think that we got everything that we wanted out of this case, and we'll get into that a little bit. I don't have as much, just to preface this, because I worked Gainos, I have a lot of intimate knowledge on the Gainos case, on how the investigation was ran, on the processes, on the trial, everything. I did not work McHugh. However, I did sit in on the trial when we had the trial. The trial was in the Northern District of Illinois, which we talked about is not common. So I don't have a lot of intimate details, but so I'm gonna kind of give you more of a broad overview, and I definitely don't have what I had for Gainos for McHugh, but we'll go through it. So for McHugh, we got what's called a whistleblower complaint, okay? And when we see what we call as a whistleblower complaint, it's usually somebody who is in a position to kind of be harmed for coming forward. So it's usually somebody that is still an employee, and they kind of want to tell on their boss, but they're scared and they're afraid that, some type of reprisal will happen to them because they came forward. So that's kind of what we consider like a whistleblower. So we had this whistleblower come forward that said McHugh Construction was using two companies, okay, that were owned by a woman named Elizabeth Perrino. So Elizabeth Perrino was a DBE certified company that she was able to get off of her status as being a female. Okay, it said that they were used as a pass-through for several federally funded contracts in the city of Chicago. Specifically, there was like a big project on the State Street Bridge. There was a lot of construction projects going on in the area. This is Elizabeth Perrino. She owned the two companies in question are called Purdell Contracting and Accurate Steel Installers, or ASI as it was sometimes called. Both of these companies were certified as DBE and WBE. So our program, the DBE program, encompasses women and minorities, and we kind of just have that one label, DBE. However, there are some entities and some government entities that certify you as DBE, but then they could also certify you in their own program, as we see MBE sometimes, minority disadvantaged business, or WBE, which would be a woman-owned disadvantaged business. So she was certified in both of those, which would be DBE on the federal side, and for the city of Chicago, she was certified as a WBE. And they get certified, just so you guys kind of have a little bit of an idea. When I'm talking about DBE, those are federally funded contracts. Most construction contracts are what we call 80-20, which would be 80% funded by the federal government and 20% would be state or local funded. However, there are times when we see the city or a county or even the state having smaller projects that they fully fund themselves, or they don't necessarily have a DBE component because it's not any federal dollars, but they want to incorporate their own type of DBE. So that's when we see the WBE or the MBE come in, where the state or the city or the municipality, the county will say, this is our own contract, but we're going to require a certain percentage to be by this disadvantage owned business. So in 2011, Perrino agreed, okay, to act as a pass-through. She sent in documents for Purdell Contracting that would appear that she worked on this Chicago O'Hare project, okay? She did not. She never worked on the project. While we call it a pass-through, because she was technically a legitimate owned business, where she could have had work, a lot of the work that we saw, it was more of a front company, where she really had done business in the past, but then once this kind of came out, she kind of just like stopped, right? She was like, oh, well, this is kind of okay for me. I can do this, right? So she falsified a lot of documents for McHugh, just to show that she was a DBE and that she was on a contract. So the moment she falsified those documents and she provided those to McHugh, and McHugh turns around and turns them in, then they are also becoming part of the fraud, right? So she didn't perform anything, okay? No labor, no nothing. That's why we kind of consider her more of a front than a pass-through, because sometimes with the pass-through, we see them doing some of the work. One of the things about this case that was shocking, okay? Investigators went and talked to Elizabeth Perrino. They interviewed her. She was fully well aware of an active investigation. okay? After the interview, she went on to continue and was recorded making deals for more fraud. So with that being said, honestly, the way the case went, I don't know if she would have been as aggressively charged as she was if that had not happened. It was more of a slap in the face, right? Like, here we are, we're telling you, and then come to find out, now we have these tape recordings of you after we spoke to you, continuing on with the fraud and the scheme and all of this stuff. Yeah, we did. Yes. So that case, this case did have an informant. We had somebody that we went and talked to. So a lot of times what we see, okay, when they're committing DBE fraud with one company, they're usually doing it with another. So sometimes we'll see that other company maybe come forward and talk to us and say, okay, I'm gonna give you guys everything, you know, that I have. And that's kind of, we had another company that was willing to come forward, and they did, and they were able to get on tape, and we have Elizabeth Perrino on tape. So Elizabeth Perrino, she went to trial in the Northern District of Illinois. This is going to be really, really sad. The U.S. attorney there declined to prosecute McHugh. We see that sometimes, and it is very frustrating for us as investigators because we feel like they're the real target of our investigation. And I can't really comment as to why that happened. I can guess, but those are the frustrations that we have when we see these very, very, very large contractors that do a lot of work in government, and they kind of are in a position of power, okay, which is not always the best, but they are. Maybe they're the only contractor that can do certain work and things like that, and it puts U.S. Attorney's Office in a difficult position, because if you go to trial and you get convicted, then you will not be able to have federally funded contracts. So there's a lot of thought process that goes into these larger companies. So Elizabeth Perrino did go to trial. She was found guilty. She was found guilty on 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of mail fraud. Okay. And she was given a year and a day. There was a civil settlement. So while we talked about before, like parallel investigation, you have a criminal side and you have the civil side. So while they declined to prosecute on the criminal side, we were able to get a civil settlement with McHugh, which was a good amount of money, right? We see $14 million, okay? That was for several contracts from 2004 to 2011. They had to have a compliance program where they had to submit a lot of documents to the government. They had an officer that kind of sat over them and would come in and review their documents. A lot of times, this is more of a burden to the company than they would ever like, because it is just somebody coming in and being a watchdog, and they really hate that. But they had that for 3 years. In exchange, they were not barred from future government contracts. And like I said, we see that sometimes. It's not what we like to see as investigators, but my role is a little bit different than the U.S. Attorney's role. And, you know, I'm here to follow the money, find the fraud. And when I do, I'm like, let's go get them. And that's not always the case. But the fact we did get, $14 million, we did hurt their pocket a little bit. I don't think too much, but, it was a win for all of us. Yeah. So that goes back. So it depends on how they divvy up the contract. Usually it'll go back to the state or the city that had the contract. So like, let's say if DOT gave the city of St. Louis, we'll say the county of St. Louis, $3 million to do a project for the roads or the sidewalks outside, right? And you guys find out that there was some DBE fraud and things that happened. So even though technically it comes back to the federal government, it would most likely probably come back to the Milwaukee County who had that federal contract. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, so what they consider the victim is going to be the government entity that handed the money out, that who the contracts were with, that's considered the victim. So what I will say is that usually when the money comes back, it's going to get back to the states or the counties or the cities. It's this big circle. DOT gives out a lot of money. We don't keep a lot of money except for our employees. So all the money funding that we get through Congress goes to all of the states. And when Nate was talking about the whistleblower, so that's something called the key tam. And that's probably something most people have never heard of. Before I started with the U.S. Department of Transportation, I had no idea what that was. And the day I started and they talked to me about this key tam, and I said, I don't know what that is. And they said it was, the technical meaning is he who sues, okay? So what that is that, let's say, in this case, there was a whistleblower who worked at the company. They went to the government and said, I want to take on this case as a key tam, and the government will say, we will join you in this case, okay? And if they join that individual in the case will move on. And if there is a civil settlement due to fraud, that person will get, I don't know, 10%. It's a percentage. I don't think it's 1/3. I don't think it was 1/3. No. I think it's like 10%. 1/3 would be more of the attorney would get 1/3. So I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. So that's what a key tam is. And that's if you are a whistleblower and you get an attorney, and there have been times where the government, so like let's say that the government says, we don't want to get involved in your key tam, okay? However, you have our blessing to move on. That individual can file a civil suit against that company and say that there was fraud committed. And if the jury finds that there's fraud committed, they would then get kind of about money. So, but that's if the government steps back and says, we don't want nothing to do with that case, which is not typical, but it has happened. Usually the reasons why government doesn't get involved in a key tam is maybe there's not enough evidence or things like that. But if you have a whistleblower who believes that there has been fraud and they've defrauded the government, we'll see that happening. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Okay. So he did get $2 million, like, yeah, 2 point something million. Yes. Oh, yeah, like re-say the, okay. So for those at home, I apologize. We were very specifically asking, Nate graciously was giving his thoughts and remembrance of what happened during the queue, because he was an employee of IDOT at the time, and recalled how the key tam went about, and the whistleblower actually did receive a portion of the civil settlement, and it came out like $2.1 million, something like that. Yeah. So that was a civil settlement for McHugh. You know, so one of the biggest challenges that we face when we look at these cases, a DBE case, is they're considered or viewed as victimless crimes, okay? Because the work was already done, right? You have this company. Most of the time with the DBE, we're not saying that they've done shoddy work or that their work is not up to par, or that they cut any corners. It's just that they are defrauding our programs. So what we're saying is that they wouldn't even have been eligible to even do this work. And there are other companies that should have been on this project, who are legitimate DBEs, who aren't committing fraud. So that's our biggest hurdle with as agents. When we bring this to the U.S. Attorney's Office, they say, is that bridge completed? Is that road done? Yes, yes, yes. But they have to understand that it's more about the program, and it's more about the individuals who don't have the opportunity to compete in and get these contracts. And that's really who our victims are. Our victims aren't always the government, who got what they paid for, right? They paid for a road, they got a road. But what about those other small businesses that didn't get that opportunity, and who never get that opportunity because certain individuals in their area have such a chokehold on contracting and, you know, DBEs, that they're never able to get that leg up. So that's what we work for, and that's one of the main reasons why we push so hard for DBE. But like I said, it's not always that we're able, you know, to get these cases prosecuted. I would say we have more luck on the civil side than the criminal side. They're more apt to go the civil route. It's less of a burden to have to prove, and we'll get some money back, and they kind of consider it like a win-win. But as criminal investigators, we want to see it go the other way. We want to see people charged. So we have had some success, and I'm hoping that as our program grows, and as we get more involved in DBE, that we're able to have that success in other areas, and not just always have to go to different states. You know, we're hoping that the same success that we had with the McHugh case in the Northern District of Illinois, we could continue with that. The last couple of years, it hasn't been that, but there have been just other crimes that have kind of just overshadowed a lot of white collar stuff. So possible charges that we see when we look at DBE fraud, we're talking mail fraud. And the reason why we say mail fraud, it's not as big as it used to be. A lot of times people used to mail in their documents, right? So if you committed fraud on these documents and you mailed them in, that would be considered mail fraud. So we don't see that as much anymore, because a lot of people do everything electronically. So that falls more in the bucket of wire fraud. So we'll see that probably charged more than mail fraud. Whereas maybe 10 years ago, it was the other way around. We would see mail fraud, and then we would see wire fraud more for the transaction of money. The obstruction of justice charges we see money laundering, we see false claims, conspiracy, and the false statements. The false statements one is probably something that many people here have seen before, because it's on many government forms at the bottom. It says, if you lie on this form, you will be charged, and it says with the 1,001. That's probably something that most people, it is probably the one that has the least amount of time if you get convicted of it, but it's one that we do charge. It's kind of like our, you know, catch-all one. So if you suspect fraud, where you're working, or if you know something, like, what do you do? Number one, your intuition is your best indicator. If you think something's wrong, chances are something probably is wrong, okay? So what are you gonna do? I would say you're gonna document, you know, this activity. You're gonna look to see like any irregularities in activity, copy, take photographs, and then report these to like your management, your superiors, or if you don't even work in that department, maybe go over to that department and say, hey, I saw this, something kind of looks a little bit fishy. Sometimes you'll see things, especially now with social media, a lot of people will pick things up from social media of owners of business through their social media platforms. Like, hey, I thought this guy was a DBE, but he owns a yacht and is, sailing across, the Mediterranean. Like, hey, what's going on? So that would be, like a red flag, right? And so it's not necessarily always have to be government documents or things, but if you notice certain things or certain patterns of somebody else, you can 100% bring those suspicions, like I said, to your supervisor or to that department. If you want to contact us, so we have a hotline. This is our hotline number. You can be anonymous or confidential. There's email and then there's mail. This is usually like if you want to make a formal complaint, you can do that through our OIG hotline. I'll leave that up for a minute for you guys if you guys want to document any of that. Or you can call, since you guys are here in Missouri and this is our region, you guys can reach directly out to our office, which the next slide I'll leave will have my contact information on it. Okay. So hopefully you guys can hear. Okay, so so they should be able to hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we have some questions that are from online. So does the US DOT only oversee fraud cases that occur on projects that have federal funding? Traditionally, yes. As a federal entity, we usually only look at federal funding. However, if there is other transportation projects that do have funding from the state or the city, they can reach out to us and ask for assistance if they believe that there has been some type of fraud. We don't, let our counterparts just go to the wayside if they, need help investigating fraud. But usually what we look at is typically federally funded projects. Okay. What happens if one of the owner's personal net worth exceeds the cap? So if the owner, maybe I should have said this a little bit earlier. So if the only owner, if there's two owners and one's a minority and one isn't, the only owner that we're looking at is the minority owner. So then I already know. So because they're the person that is applying for the program. So if they exceed the net worth cap, then they will be like aged out of the program. Okay. Let's see. Does St. Louis County certify businesses as DBE, MBE, and WBE? I have no idea. Okay, no, they do not. They don't do any certification. So who certifies? The city of St. Louis. Okay, and the airport? Okay.
Missouri Department of Transportation.
Okay, so city of St. Louis, the Missouri Department of Transportation would be the certifiers here in Missouri. Okay, so let's see. What should we do if there is proof that the 51% owner of the DBE company is not in control? You should file a complaint. If you have proof that the 51% minority owner is not in control, 100% file a complaint. And we can send out, you could send out my information to, okay, perfect. Nate will send out that information. So I apologize that our computer died. So the last couple slides you guys at home were not able to see, which did have my contact information. Okay. I think SBA as a cap has increased to 28.48. So yeah, like I explained earlier, so we do follow SBA, and sometimes their cap will go up. We just need a little bit of time sometimes to catch up with SBA. So there may be a little bit of gap in what our program has and what SBA's program has. So if you see the SBA raise their cap and then we haven't yet, you will probably fairly soon, you'll see us raise our cap. What is the protocol for an owner of a DBE? Okay, what is the protocol if the owner of a DBE is the owner of a non-DBE company and bid on jobs and the prime, and I don't understand this question. So maybe I have to come back to that. Okay. Employee-owned companies are increasing in popularity. If any of the several employee owners exceed the net worth cap, will the company lose their DBE? So like I explained, we're only looking at the DBE. So if the DBE exceeds that cap, then yes, they will graduate out of the program. How is the agency dealing with those applicants that identify as different gender? So those are issues that, I laugh because there is a lot of issues that are coming up that we don't necessarily have rules for yet, or that, we have to kind of do like on a case-by-case basis. So we're going to have to look at that, and I'm sure that's going to be an issue. But if somebody has transitioned fully, and I believe that they are considered a woman, and that's kind of what their ID says, and that's how they present themselves daily, and if you looked around, you would think that they were a woman, and do not quote me, but I believe that they would be allowed in the program. Okay. Let's see, but I can follow up with that for you guys just to clarify, just to make sure. Let's see, we're having a discussion in our office. Can you go over your personal home included in the net worth? Okay, so where you live is not, your personal residence is not included in your net worth, okay? However, if you have a home and then you have a lake house and then you have a condo and then you have all of those other things will be included. But where you live and where you reside daily is not included. Okay, so let me go back to this question here because I kind of don't know. It says, what is the protocol for if a owner of a DBE, 49%, is owner of a non-DBE company and a bid on a job and the prime and the sub work to their DBE company? I don't understand that question. So if somebody wants to resubmit, I don't really understand what is being asked, so I apologize. Yeah. Right. So when you have a non-DBE part owner that we're not looking at that non-DBE owner. All the documents are going, I know. It is a heartburn for me too. And I understand that. And I feel like if it's going to be a certified DBE company and that person is half owner, they should be also complying with the same rules that the minority owner is, but that's not the way the program is set up. But I do understand that heartburn 100%. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yes. Yes. 100%. Yeah. So what was said here in the room was if somebody has a DB company that they are looking to get certified, but they're also owner of another company that they are not looking to get certified as a DBE, that other company would be considered part of the network. Right. Yeah, 100%. Okay. Anybody else? So there's a formula in the account. Yeah. Yeah. So when we look at that, it's usually about 7 years, okay? There are different, when there is something that is what's considered an ongoing scheme, we're able to reach back a little bit further. Yeah, so let's say that you started this scheme in 2010, okay? And now we're in 2022, so it's 12 years ago. So technically, we're looking at, we will go back 6 years on the criminal side, like 7 years on the civil side. However, because the scheme started and it continued on and there was never a break in the scheme, we can reach back a little bit further. Some prosecutors don't like to do that. They like to kind of stick to the guidelines, but you have some that are a little bit more aggressive and they'll say, well, we have the authority, we can do it. So it depends, but usually when there's a continuing on of a scheme, we're able to reach back a little bit further. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yes. So, okay, let me step back because we have two things. Do you mean the commingling of funds at, let's say that the city of Milwaukee gets federal dollars and they receive money from the county and they receive money from the state and they only have one account? Yes, okay. So that's difficult and we have ran into that. we do, what is preferred is that the cities and the counties and the states would have separate accounts where their federal dollars would flow into, where their state dollars would flow into. So when we see the commingling of funds, then we have to reach back and say, okay, how much money did we supply to MoDOT? How much money did MoDOT supply to the city of Milwaukee? So that's kind of like, it's like what we call, anybody who's an investigator, we follow the money. But it is cleaner for us when we do an investigation, when we see the cities or the counties or the states have separate pots where they'll say, these are our federal dollars, these are our state dollars, these are our county dollars, these are our city dollars. But sometimes we do see that, and we just have to go back and trace the money back, and then we'll say, okay, well, you have $10 million in there, but only 7 million are federal dollars, and 3 million are, or 1 million is from, the city, and 2 million from the state. Okay. Okay. Right, and we do see that. So when we go back, somebody says, there's a contract. And I say, okay, is it federally funded? And then they say, well, I don't know. And then I go back and I'm looking at this contract, and the contract may not say any federally funded dollars, but then it says it has a DBE requirement. A DBE requirement is a trigger for us that says, well, most likely that's a federal contract because that's a federal program. Okay. If we see MBE or WBE in contracts, that could be like, well, could be state, could be federal, depends on how that state like words it. But usually if it has DBE, it's a trigger to say that that is a federally funded project. However, we have seen times where people have these boilerplate contracts, right? And they don't change a lot in the contract. They just change like the amount and the date and whatever. And then there's like, 150 pages of all these rules and regulations. And a lot of times those have federal regulations in there. And they will use those same boilerplate contracts, even for contracts that are not federally funded. Okay. Mhm. So what it's all going to boil down to is you have to find that contract, okay, and you have to get the source of that funding. You should be able to, even if you can't track the money technically going in, you should be able to, the state should be able to tell you how much money that they got from the U.S. Department of Transportation and what they intended to use those funds for. And they're usually going to say, well, we're giving some grant funds to such and such county because they need to redo these roads or bridges. Bridges are a big thing. They're very fragile, I would say, especially right now. So you really would have to go back and do a lot of legwork. And that's the only way when you have states that aren't set up, you'll go to some states and they're super like transparent. You could see that they have websites. You could log on and see how much money a contractor received. And if that was a federal or a state, and then you go to some states where you literally have to, dig through a box of, and I wish it was the same across the board. It's just not. So I apologize. Thank you. Yes. Oh, yeah. So he talked very specifically about the funneling of federal dollars and state dollars and the commingling of them, and how he would be able to tell what's what. And I just said, look, there's not a perfect way, and he would kind of have to do a lot of legwork. And then also the Title VI, which is a federal law. And what was the other law that's in the state that you said is not, you said they have to fill out a different form? Don't they have a different? funding, when it's state, right, when it's state funding, that the Title VI doesn't necessarily apply to the state funding, so they would have to fill out a different form. So that's kind of what he was talking about. Anybody else? Yes. What did you call them? Shovel ready? Shovel ready project. Okay. Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay. So what I was just asked here is that there historically have been these projects called shovel-ready projects, where the money is funneled to the state, and then the state will divvy out those funds. And some people tend to believe that those funds, because they're divvied out through the state, are not federally funded contracts. Okay, that is not true. The U.S. Department of Transportation does not contract with anybody. All of our money goes to the states. So every U.S. Department of Transportation federal dollar is going to be funneled through the states. And then it'll go to the counties. And then we'll see it go to the cities. That's how the program works. That's how all of our grant funding works. So if you got money, chances are, if there is a highway construction project here in Missouri through MoDOT, it is going to be what we call 80-20. 80% funded by federal dollars, 20% funded by state and local entities. Sometimes it's 100% funded by federal dollars. We do not, like I said, we do not contract. So if the money is coming from the state, chances are it is federal dollars. I'm not saying all the money, because the state obviously does have their own sources of revenue. But when we look at these large construction projects, these are millions, sometimes billions of dollars that no state could afford to fund that alone. It would be impossible. Anybody else? Yes. Yes, there is a website to see some of the cases. So if you go, you could just Google the U.S. Department of Transportation Office of Inspector General, and you will see you'll see historical cases on there. You'll also see we update it quite often whenever there's a new case that has come about or a new charge or different things. You'll see, and it kind of has like a scrolling little list on the front page, like, you know, contractor just charged or contractor just found guilty. You'll be able to see that, and you'll be able to go back and look at older cases. Anybody else? I mean, I don't think there's anything on here, but I don't know if I'm looking at the right spot. Sure. Okay. So I think we got all of the questions here from the. Okay. Yeah, I think we have all the questions. I don't think there's anything new. And if you guys don't have any questions, I really appreciate you guys having me here today. I hope it was a great time for you guys. I really love DBE cases. They're kind of my passion. I know they're not the funnest, but I appreciate you guys just having me here today, and I hope maybe I could come back. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for attending. Oh, that's not on.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks everyone for attending. We appreciate you coming. It's good to see faces in person again. Again, we want to thank Miss Christina, and hopefully we can get her back. We appreciate time. We thank those who were able to attend online. We will be in touch with everyone to see how we did. I want to thank the MB team here. That's the team. Gina Montgomery, Simone Riney, Nikki Thompson, and I call her the cleanup hitter, Trinia Russell. She's the cleanup. We want to thank you all again. Safe travels. We'll be in touch and appreciate your comment. No problem. No problem. Great. Good seeing you. Okay. I know who you are.